Every single day, you may be paying taxes without even realizing it, not to the government, but to your own poor financial habits. This behavior often shows up the moment you leave the office or right after finishing a long chain of stressful tasks. From a behavioral biology perspective, this is a state of ego depletion. After a full day of making hundreds of logical decisions, the self control capacity of your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, planning, and impulse inhibition, starts to decline noticeably, triggering a state of cognitive overwhelm. At this point, your brain no longer wants to optimize your finances, it wants to reduce effort as quickly as possible. Something as small as walking an extra 500 meters, cooking a meal, or waiting a little longer suddenly gets exaggerated into a burden that consumes too much of your remaining mental energy. And, to approve that spending decision without making you feel guilty, your rational mind immediately produces a justification that sounds very reasonable. I'm just spending a little extra to buy convenience, save time, and use that time to rest or do something more productive. But in reality, that so called saved time is rarely used to create any real value. More often, it dissolves into lying down and scrolling through social media without direction. This decision becomes extremely attractive in the short term because of the law of least effort. Technology platforms have made spending money almost frictionless. Your card is already linked, your digital wallet is already saved, identity verification happens through fingerprint or face recognition, and one small tap is enough to complete the transaction. When you no longer see cash physically leaving your hand, the pain of paying is almost eliminated. The part of the brain associated with discomfort from loss, especially the insula, is no longer activated strongly enough to make you hesitate. On the opposite side, tapping the Order Now button creates a fast dopamine signal, giving you the psychological reward of being served, being indulged, and feeling in control at the exact moment when you are most exhausted. This reward is dangerous because it happens almost invisibly, below conscious awareness, and gradually creates a default bias. After 21 to 66 days of repetition, the brain may begin to classify this behavior as a safe survival shortcut, turning it into an automatic reflex. The long term consequence is not only that 15% to 25% of your income can be eroded by micro expenses, but, more dangerously, your tolerance for small inconveniences gets dragged down to the lowest possible level. Financially, it creates the feeling of being poor because of tiny things, leaving you constantly confused and out of control, unable to understand why your income is not low, yet your bank account is always empty at the end of the month. If you have a habit of staying up until 1 a.m. browsing e commerce platforms after a terrible workday, you are not just shopping, you are paying an extremely expensive pain relief tax to soothe damage to your self worth. This stress soothing tax, often called retail therapy, has a very specific timeline, late at night between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., or on Friday afternoon, right after you have experienced a negative event in the real world, being criticized by your boss, having conflict with a coworker, or facing the pressure of missing a performance target. The emotion that triggers this behavior is not simply sadness. More precisely, it is a loss of self worth and a feeling of helplessness toward reality. At that moment, your brain interprets the situation as the real world is harsh, hostile, and you are failing inside it. When the ego is wounded, the brain's defense system looks for an immediate compensation mechanism to restore a sense of balance. The self justifying voice appears instantly to legitimize the purchase. I've worked hard, endured pressure all week, don't I deserve to enjoy this? Or, this item is heavily discounted, I'll use it anyway, so buying it now is actually saving money. But in reality, you are using logic for one specific purpose: to escape the guilt of spending outside your plan. The psychological mechanism that makes this decision so hard to resist in the short term is focus shifting. When the real world makes you feel powerless, browsing products, adding items to your cart, and clicking buy gives you an illusion of control. You may not be able to control your boss's behavior. You may not be able to control your KPI. You may not be able to control how other people judge you. But you have full control over the fate of that product. The psychological reward here is not the actual usefulness of the item. It is the immediate release from helplessness, replaced by excitement and anticipation. This reward is dangerous because it operates through a conditioned reflex loop: stress signal, spending behavior, temporary chemical relief. Every time pressure rises, the brain does not try to solve the root problem at work or in life. Instead, it chooses the shortest and least energy consuming path towards short term comfort. The long term consequence is that you accumulate a large amount of fast depreciating consumer goods, seriously reducing the cash flow that could have gone into savings or investment. Habitually, it creates materialistic coping mechanism and gradually destroys delayed gratification. In other words, you do not just lose money, you slowly lose the psychological ability to face real crises in the future. The latest smartphone, the trendiest pair of shoes, or the expensive check-in coffee you buy today may actually be a forced tax you impose on yourself to avoid the fear of being excluded from your social tribe. That is the essence of the status and pride tax, a tax with an extremely expensive psychological rate tied to social situations such as class reunions, meetings with business partners, networking events, or most commonly, constantly seeing other people's glamorous lifestyles on social media. The core emotion behind this behavior is status anxiety and the primitive fear of being excluded from the group structure. The human brain is evolutionarily wired to constantly compare its position within the social hierarchy. When you see people around you possessing symbols of success, your mind may interpret the situation as a survival threat. If I don't have these things, I'll be seen as inferior, looked down on, and left behind. To carry out spending beyond your actual capacity, your rational mind automatically produces a strategic sounding justification. This is an investment in my personal image and social relationships. I need to look the part if I want to work with bigger partners and earn more money. The psychological mechanism behind this behavior is the desire for social identity affirmation and mimetic desire. You do not truly need the item in a functional sense. What you crave is the feeling of being recognized, admired, or at least not looked down on. The short term psychological reward is immediate reassurance, the feeling of belonging to a higher social class, and signals of approval from the environment around you. The danger of this reward is that it deceives your cognitive system with a fake financial identity, forcing you to optimize for outer worth instead of net worth. This behavior repeats continuously because the standard for status satisfaction keeps changing. Once you upgrade your lifestyle, the standard of the group around you also rises, forcing you to keep spending more just to maintain your position. From there, you are pushed into the trap of lifestyle inflation on the hedonic treadmill. The long term consequence is that your cash flow gets suffocated by depreciating consumer assets with high maintenance costs. You lose the feeling of control over your own financial future, get trapped in an endless race, and work yourself into exhaustion. Not to build real wealth for yourself, but to maintain an admiring gaze from people you may not even truly like.